Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wondered about music. So, whether you're a music lover or just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place, so I hope you stick around. So, today I want to talk about playlists. Not just the ones that Spotify recommends on a Monday morning or the ones that we just throw on whilst we're cleaning, but why we make playlists at all. Why we spend hours curating the right sequence and why naming them feels like titling a chapter of our life. I've been thinking a lot lately about how playlists have become one of the most emotional things that we make and that we own. They're like digital diaries that are filled with fragments of who we were, who we are, and who we want to be. And as someone who also worked at Spotify, I got to see just how important sharing these little collections of ourselves can be. Even now, when a mixtape is just a link and not a physical tape wrapped in a ribbon. So, in this episode, I want to go on a journey from the days of handcrafted mixtapes to the age of algorithms. We're going to explore the psychology behind why we make playlists, how they help us regulate our emotions, preserve our memories, and even shape our identities. So let's get into it. Let's start with the simple but surprisingly deep question of why do we even make playlists? And it might seem like a modern convenience, a way to organize songs, to avoid skipping, to not have to keep searching for the right track every time we want to work or drive or even cry in the shower. But underneath that surface, there's something so much more human going on. Playlists are deeply psychological. They're mini identity statements, and whether we realize it or not, they're tools that we use to manage our memories and our moods. Playlists are emotional mirrors, whether you made them on a cassette tape, a burned CD, or just drag them together on Spotify. They reflect who we are, who we were, and sometimes even who we want to become. And I think that there's 3 big reasons that we create playlists. So it's for emotion, memory, and most of all, identity. So let's start out with memory. Playlists don't just express who we are, they also preserve who we were. We make playlists during different life chapters without sometimes even thinking about it. They're almost like digital diary entries that you didn't even mean to write. We make them casually, often without much thought. We just group songs together for a mood, a moment, or a season of life. But then time passes, and suddenly that final year of university playlist feels like a window into a version of you that no longer exists. Think about that summer road trip playlist, maybe even songs that got you through lockdown. When you listen back, it's more than nostalgia, it's like time travel. And sometimes we even measure life by these playlists. It's like eras that we've moved through. The heartbreak era, the new city, new me era, your healing era. And these playlists become emotional markers. They hold versions of you that may be long gone in everyday life, but you can visit them at any time just by pressing play. And I think that's such a powerful and beautiful thing to know that you can reconnect with a past self, not just through photos or journals, but through sound. And that's the power of music. It encodes memory with precision. Not just the facts, but the feeling. You think about where you were, who you were with, what you were going through. And sometimes it even reminds you of the person that you were becoming in that moment. And there's actually a reason why some people don't like to revisit old playlists. It's not just the cringe that you feel of outdated music taste. It's actually because those songs still hold something. a memory, a relationship, a version of yourself that maybe you're not quite ready to meet again. But other times, those playlists offer comfort. They say, hey, look how far you've come. But I think it's also not only about looking back. We also make playlists in anticipation of moments that are still yet to come. We make those playlists like the ones before a holiday or before a big life change. And I think there's something ritualistic about that. I love making a playlist, before going on a vacation, before some kind of event. I feel like it just kind of sets you up for what's to happen. The playlist becomes a blueprint for the future. It's almost something to grow into. It's like a vibe that you want to embody for that moment, a feeling that you want to have. It's a version of you that doesn't actually exist yet, but it could. And when the moment finally arrives, when you get on that plane or you move into a new apartment or you're just walking into something unknown, you press play and just like that, the music catches up with you. You've arrived in this moment that you musically prepared for, and I think that's awesome. Now moving on to emotion, which is arguably what unites all our playlists, our need to feel. And if memory is what playlists hold on to, then I think emotion is what they move through. We don't make playlists because we feel something. We make them to feel something. And music is one of the fastest, most effective emotional regulators that we have. Just think about all the times that you've had a good cry to a sad song in your bedroom, or even had that burst of motivation at the gym listening to that amazing workout song that just made you push through your final set. Playlists are emotional tools. They're built for shifting, soothing, fueling, and sometimes just sitting with whatever we're feeling. They're almost like a form of self-prescribed medicine. And sometimes it's not just about matching your mood, it's also about changing it. Music lets us almost alchemize emotion, turn heartbreak into catharsis, for example, turn anxiety into calm. When nothing else helps, we often build a playlist because building is hopeful. It means we still believe in the possibility of feeling better. There's actually one quote that I heard that really sticks with me. It's, you don't just make a heartbreak playlist, you listen to it until you're ready to delete it. And I think there's something beautifully sad about that, because the moment that you do hit delete or even rename it is the moment that you realize that you started to heal, and the music helps you get there. Other playlists aren't even emotional in a traditional sense. They're functional, but still deeply personal. So think about the focus playlist that calms your brain, the gym playlist that makes you feel like a superhero, or the ambient sleep playlist that just cues your body to finally relax. Even those are emotional. They serve your nervous system, which is just another way of saying that they serve you. And it's also why music therapy is such a powerful tool. It's why people with dementia respond to songs that they can't respond to with words. Because music doesn't just reflect emotion, it transmits it. It bypasses our logic and it goes straight to the heart, the gut, and our limbic system. And when you build a playlist, you're not just putting songs together, you're actually crafting an emotional landscape. And that's actually why playlists are so personal, why they can feel so vulnerable. And I want to get into this a little bit later in the episode, but they really don't just show what you like, they show what you feel or what you want to feel, or even what you can't feel but you wish that you could. And they are really one of the most vulnerable, raw kind of expressions of emotion out there. And on that note, lastly, moving on to identity. Playlists aren't just collections of songs, they're reflections of who we are. When we make them, we're not just organizing music, we're organizing ourselves. Each playlist becomes a kind of small act of identity construction. What you choose, what you exclude, how you title it, and what mood or message it's meant to carry. In curating music, we're curating a version of ourselves that we want to represent, or sometimes, like I said, one that we want to step into. Our playlist collections are so deeply personal, like I said, and I bet you wouldn't feel comfortable sharing them with just anyone. Each playlist reflects a different aspect of who you are as a person, and what you choose to share is the image that you're choosing to portray. So think about it. You wouldn't just send any playlist to a new partner or play just any song if you're together with friends getting ready for a night out. You make conscious choices because music speaks for you. It says, this is what I'm like, or maybe more subtly, this is who I want to be. Whether it's an upbeat, confidence-boosting playlist for when you need to feel bold, or a kind of moody mix that makes you feel understood, each selection is a tiny identity statement. And in a world that often demands quick definitions of who we are, playlists offer a more nuanced, creative form of self-expression, one that evolves, adapts, and sometimes contradicts itself, just like we always do. They can also function like little sub-personas. You might have a playlist for your main character energy and another for your introverted evenings. Those aren't just moods, they're modes of being. Music gives them voice and shape. Playlists let us try on different selves, express parts that we don't always show out loud, or keep sacred the parts of ourselves that we only reveal in those intimate, private moments. And what's powerful is that this identity work often happens without us even realizing it. You make a playlist called sad music, and you don't really think much of it. But later when you scroll back through your Spotify and see that title, you remember a whole version of yourself, a mindset, a season, a self that you once occupied. And like I said previously, music really is a mirror, but unlike photos or journals, it reflects not just what we looked like or what we did, but also how we felt. And in that way, playlists are so much more than music collections. They're self-portraits in disguise. Not static, polished ones, but shifting, living soundtracks of who we are. And while today's playlists may live on phones and streaming platforms, the instinct behind them isn't new. In fact, it's been around for decades, just in a different form. Before playlists, there were mixtapes. Now, mixtapes were never just about music. They were emotional artifacts, handcrafted, deliberate, and deeply personal. To make one was to tell a story, and often to say something that you might not have had the words for otherwise. Every mixtape was a message in disguise, stitched together through melody and mood. And gifting someone a mixtape really meant something. It was an act of vulnerability, choosing songs that felt like you or that reminded you of them, then offering it up as some kind of emotional blueprint. Here's what I feel. Here's what I want to say. Here's what I hope you'll understand. And sometimes it was brave, especially when the feelings were unspoken. And in that sense, giving one just wasn't just personal, it was risky. You were revealing something real and hoping that it would be received with the same care that you put into making it. There was an art to it too. Sequencing really mattered. So the first track, it set the tone. It was your opening statement. And the final track, that one usually carried the weight. It was the emotional climax. People spent hours debating which songs to include and in what order, like almost crafting a musical narrative arc. And even the silence between the songs mattered. Those short pauses gave the listener space to sit in the feeling, to breathe, reflect, absorb, before moving on to the next part of the story. But it wasn't just the songs. Mixtapes were tactile. They were things that you could hold, sometimes decorated with doodles, private jokes, scribbled hearts, or inside references that only you and the receiver would understand. They were part soundtracks and almost part scrapbooks, and because of that, they really held this physical and emotional weight. They were time capsules that you could stumble across in an old drawer years later and be transported right back to, for example, the summer of a particular year, or your first heartbreak, or that one magical car ride that you had. And even the imperfections, the hiss of the tape, the slightly shaky transitions, the audio glitches, it all added to the charm. It didn't have to be perfect to be powerful. And in fact, those tiny flaws just made it feel more human, a bit more real. And then there was the time spent making them. Making a mixtape wasn't instant. You couldn't drag and drop songs. You had to record each one in real time. You listened as you built it, and that meant that you spent an hour to make an hour. You curated with intention, patience, and care, and the effort itself was part of that message. This took time because you were worth the time. And maybe that's part of what feels like is missing today. In a world that's ruled by instant gratification, where everything is just a tap away, music, messages, relationships, the effort needed to make something meaningful has quietly shrunk. We can send a playlist in under a second. We can like, scroll, swipe, and share without even ever really slowing down. And somewhere along the way, I think we may have become a little bit more complacent. Not because we care less, but the tools that we have are designed for speed, not necessarily depth. The mixtape process really forced you to slow down, to engage, and to linger in your feelings. It really asked something of you. And that asking, that investment of time and attention, made the finished product more powerful. It wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. And maybe that's the part that we miss. Not just the physicality of tapes, but the emotional weight of having taken the time. Receiving a mixtape felt like being seen, like someone had reached into their own emotional world and made something just for you. Before you even pressed play, it already meant something, because it wasn't just music, it was meaning. A soundtrack of how they saw you, a version of you almost through their ears. People made mixtapes for birthdays, breakups, long-distance friendships. It was for lovers, siblings, crushes. There was intentionality behind them, one that came from scarcity. You only had so much tape, so many songs, so you had to choose carefully, and every inclusion meant something. There was no shuffle button, no unlimited skips. You just press play and let the story unfold in the exact way that it was meant to be heard. As technology moved forward, so did the way that we curated music. Mixtapes gave way to burned CDs, those shiny discs that we'd slide into our computers, carefully selecting around 12 or so tracks to fit the space. I remember burning CDs for family car rides, making them for my parents or just for myself before a long journey. I remember designing the cover art for them and scribbling in permanent marker with a little smiley face. Each one was like a musical postcard from a specific moment in time. And every time I go through my old boxes and I find them, it hits something in me, you know? And this was in the early iTunes days where playlisting became a more structured ritual. You could just drag and drop songs into folders and just burn these CDs. This was my childhood era. You had to think about what would fit, both in terms of length and mood. The tools had changed, but the intent stayed the same. It's a collection of songs that say something that words can't. And then came the iPod. Suddenly, your entire curated identity could fit in your back pocket. You could carry hundreds of playlists wherever you went, each one a little window into your inner world. And with this shift, playlisting became more personal, more private. It was no longer something that you just gave away as a gift, but also something that you built for yourself. It's a solo ritual, a way to soundtrack your day. And then came streaming, the thing that everyone loves and hates. With platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, music became infinite. You didn't have to own songs anymore. You didn't even have to download them. The entire musical universe was available at your fingertips, anytime, anywhere. But interestingly, even when we have access to everything, we still create these finite emotional containers. Some of my playlists, for example, I have a wind down playlist, a playlist called Sweat It Out for the gym. We still carve out these almost sonic boundaries for how we feel, who we are, or what we're doing. And the titles of these playlists, they've become a form of storytelling. In a way, they do what handwritten mixtape covers once did. They express an emotional undercurrent, a glimpse of context, a way of saying, this is what I'm going through right now without even saying it out loud. But with streaming also came a change in how we connect. With mixtapes or burned CDs, there was effort in the exchange. You had to physically give something away. But now you can just share a playlist with a click, a link. There's no tape, no paper sleeve, no handwritten note. It's just a URL dropped in the chat. And while that can make sharing faster and more convenient, it also raises a question. Is the intimacy still there? Can a Spotify link ever carry the same emotional weight as a physical mixtape once did? We've lost the tactile nature, the decorated covers, the scribbled notes, the feeling of holding someone's action in your hands. Playlists are sleeker, they're streamlined. But actually, I think that it doesn't mean that they've fully lost their soul. The emotion behind them is still there. When we make playlists for someone, even for ourselves, we're actually still doing the same thing that we've always done. We're collecting feelings, arranging them into an order, and hitting play. Though the technology has changed, I think the emotion behind it really hasn't. The shift from tapes and CDs to tech didn't erase the why. It just changed the how. And we might not make mixtapes with Sharpies and cassette tapes anymore, but the reasons that we curate for connection, memory, expression, those have stayed exactly the same. And I think it all comes down to preference. There'll always be some people that value the physical, tactile elements of music more than the kind of more streamlined versions. Some people, like myself, love to collect records. And that helps us feel more connected with the music itself rather than just streaming it because, like I said, we live in this era where we don't actually own the music that's on our devices anymore. We just kind of click a button and press play, which I think is incredible in so many ways. And, don't get me wrong, I definitely could not live without my streaming subscription. But I think there is this yearning for tactile things, and it's also linked to nostalgia as well. Honestly, I think I could do a whole other episode on just records and cassette tapes and why those things feel so important to own and have in this digital era. But yeah, I think it will always come down to personal preference, because whether we like it or not, we're going to keep getting more digitalized. But that doesn't mean that we still can't hold on to the more tactile version of things if we want to. Now, before I move on, I just wanted to pop in here and say, if you're enjoying this episode, perhaps you would enjoy being part of the SoundMind Circle. We've launched a monthly music membership group that you can join and get access to exclusive content like workshops and sessions, resources like journaling prompts and challenges, playlists, behind-the-scene podcast content, and more. It's a place for music lovers like you to reconnect with music and tap into how to use it more mindfully for well-being alongside an absolutely amazing community. So if you're interested, you can head to the link in the description here. I would absolutely love to see you there. But with that being said, let's get on with the episode. Now, I want to chat a little bit about my experience of working at Spotify. So I worked there from the summer of 2022 until the end of 2023. And I learned so much about how people interact with music from a more practical perspective, rather than just the pure music psychology side of things. So I worked as a user experience researcher where I had the unique opportunity to explore the ways that people connect with each other through music. And one of my projects actually focused on how users share playlists with one another and how they use music to build and nurture relationships, whether it's with friends, family, or romantic partners. And one thing that stood out to me in my research was how deeply personal and sentimental playlists can be. Users would tell me about the gifted playlists that they created for birthdays, anniversaries, or even as a way to comfort someone going through a tough time. And much like those mixtapes that people used to make, the act of gifting a playlist holds emotional weight. It's not just about sharing songs, it's like sharing a piece of your heart. And users were looking for ways to make these playlist gifts even more personal and more meaningful, something that felt just as intimate as a physical mixtape did. And that emotional layer is something that we often overlook when we talk about technology and music. But I think it's very much alive, and at Spotify, it was something that I saw come up time and time again. As features like collaborative playlists emerge, so did new ways of building connection. Now friends, family members, or couples can build something together. It's not just a list of songs, but it's almost like a joint emotional narrative. I spoke to groups of friends who made shared playlists for festivals or girls' holidays. Friends and family who made collaborative car ride soundtracks. Long-distance partners who added songs in real time to stay close, even when they're miles apart. Every song was like a message, a memory, or just a small gesture that says, "This made me think of you." And what's crazy is there's such a wide range of playlists that exist specifically on Spotify today, and each of them serves such a different emotional or functional purpose. You've got playlists that you create yourself, which often reflect identity, aspiration, or mood. Then you've got playlists created by others, which you might borrow or even follow. And they're often discovered through social media or even on the platform directly. And these are actually often where the magic of discovery happens, whether they're curated by friends, influencers, or strangers with just similar music tastes. These playlists open the door to new sounds and genres that you might never have explored on your own. Playlists like these can be a window into someone else's world, revealing their musical taste, moods, and life stories through the songs that they choose. Listening to someone else's playlist is like stepping into their emotional landscape, and it gives you this sense of connection with them, even if they're miles away or just a complete stranger. And then you've got Spotify curated playlists like Discover Weekly, Your Time Capsule, or New Music Friday, which are algorithmically tailored to your taste. They've made music discovery effortless, offering us a soundtrack to everything from a casual day at home to an impromptu road trip. And Spotify uses its vast data to make predictions on what you might love, and it brings this level of personalization to the listening experience that was unimaginable before. And then you have collaborative playlists, which I already mentioned, but you also have blends, which take collaborative playlists a step further. These personalized playlists combine your music tastes with those of a friend or loved one, blending the two together in a single shared playlist. It's such an intimate way to listen to music together, even if you're physically apart. And it's such a fun and interactive way to just discover each other's musical worlds, offering a personal experience that's tailor-made for your relationship. It can be done with one other person or actually a group of people. And it also gives you like a taste match up to 100%, which I think is amazing and kind of taps into what I've spoken about in a previous episode on like dating, for example, how people really like to know how well matched they are with someone in terms of their music taste. And Blend really taps into that, which I always thought was really cool. Working at Spotify gave me this front row seat to how dramatically playlists have transformed the way that we listen to music. The shift from mixtapes to playlists hasn't just changed how we share music, but it's actually transformed how we listen to it. Actually, after single tracks, playlists are the most shared format from Spotify. And I think that really shows that there's been this quiet but profound shift from albums to playlists and from artist first to emotion first listening. We used to press play on an album to understand an artist's story. There was this narrative arc from the opening track to the final song. Listening was linear and intentional. And albums were always crafted as this cohesive body of work meant to be experienced in order as a reflection of a moment in an artist's life. But today, we often turn to music not to understand someone else's message, but to decode our own mood. We listen to playlists to match how we feel or how we want to feel, and they've become this tool of emotional self-regulation. Our own personal soundtracks for study, sleep, heartbreak, healing, simply just surviving the day. And in many ways, they've changed how we listen more than they've changed music itself, because when the first port of call for many listeners is a playlist, whether curated by a friend, a stranger, or algorithmically, we often lose the context around the music. We may fall in love with a single song on a playlist, but never dig into the artist's wider body of work. And that loss of context isn't necessarily negative at all times. I think it's just different. It reflects a new kind of listening, one that's functional rather than narrative. And we consume music based on utility, for focus, for the gym, for winding down after work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the emotional connection is gone. In fact, I think it's just shifted. Because of the accessibility and flexibility of playlists today, it offers benefits that we couldn't have even imagined a decade ago. And there are so many artists out there like The Weeknd, Billie Eilish, Kendrick Lamar, just to name a few modern ones, that still craft albums as conceptual journeys. Cohesive works where every track is placed with intention and narrative purpose. These types of albums, they invite you to listen in order, to stay for the full story, not just the kind of highlight reel. In interviews, many musicians have mourned the decline of the album format. They argue that playlist culture has reduced their work to these kind of mood-matching snippets, which kind of strips songs of, the surrounding narrative and design. And it's not just that people don't finish albums, oftentimes they don't start them. Playlists might broaden discovery, but they also flatten nuance. And this tension reveals this kind of cultural crossroad, one where the artist's vision and the listener's emotional needs aren't always aligned. We crave music that reflects our moment, but in doing so, we sometimes miss the artists. And I think also, music has also been this social glue throughout history. It's a way to express love, share culture, and build group identity. And I think there's something a little bit lonelier about playlist listening. Albums used to be these shared experiences, and yeah, they still are. But, albums sparked conversations, whether you were passing around a CD, sitting through a vinyl together, or dissecting lyrics on a bus ride. They spark these conversations. Did you hear track 5? Why did it end like that? There's this communal thrill in unpacking an artist's journey with friends or even strangers online. I love that culture. But playlists, on the other hand, they're often deeply personal. We build them alone for moments that no one else sees. They're curated mood boards for our internal states, almost soundtracking every moment from heartbreak to hustling. And there's beauty in that intimacy, but it also means that we don't always talk about music in the same way. Our listening has become more introspective. You might share a playlist with someone, but rarely do you discuss the 4th track on your heartbreak mix the way that you would have dissected an album's hidden gem. So I think in many ways, playlist culture has turned music into this personal echo chamber, reflecting your current feelings, but rarely challenging them or inviting dialogue. In today's streaming era, we no longer have to do the heavy lifting of discovering or curating music ourselves. We've handed that task over to algorithms that study our listening behavior and feed back an increasingly refined stream of suggestions. These tools reflect versions of our musical selves that are shaped by clicks, skips, and repeat listens. In many ways, I think it's magical. Music finds us. We don't have to look for it. But this level of convenience also comes with a subtle trade-off. We start to let technology define who we are musically. Instead of asking ourselves, what do I feel like listening to? We might just click play on a pre-made mood playlist. And over time, our sense of musical identity becomes something passively consumed rather than actively constructed. And there's also the risk that these algorithmic mirrors distort more than they reflect. Maybe you listened to a sad song once and now your entire homepage is saturated in melancholic ballads. And in these cases, the algorithm becomes less of a tool and more of a tunnel. I've definitely been in that situation where I've, for example, listened to a little bit of Spanish music and then my entire collection becomes just, Spanish music. And I'm like, wait a second, what about everything else? While algorithmic curation has undoubtedly widened our access to music, I think it also raises this deeper question of, are we becoming disconnected from the emotional labor of choosing music for ourselves? And what happens when a playlist knows how we feel before we do? But I do want to end to focus on the positives because, I love playlists. I'm an avid playlist curator. I couldn't live without them, honestly. And the beauty does lie in a lot of the things that I've mentioned here. But also, we now have playlists that support mental health and memory, like the UK charity that I've spoken about before, Playlist for Life, which helps people living with dementia reconnect to themselves through building personalised soundtracks. We also have study and concentration playlists that help students find their flow, curated workout mixes that push us to go further. We have office playlists that create this shared sense of atmosphere in co-working spaces. Playlists are part of our routines, rituals, and even now in healthcare. So it's definitely not a bad thing at all. And I think they carry so much power. I think we just need to be mindful in when and how we're using them. And now we live in a world where anyone can curate or be curated for. You don't need DJ skills, stacks of records, or even any kind of musical knowledge. You just need a mood, a moment, or a memory. You can spend hours obsessively crafting the perfect mix for a road trip, a breakup, adjusting the order until it feels just right. Or you can let the algorithms do the heavy lifting, serving up a mood-based playlist tailored to your listening history, time of day, even the weather. And in many ways, we've outsourced this labor of curation. We've traded the friction of discovery for the ease of endless recommendation, and that's the other side of the coin. But yet, despite this automation, we still ache for that same old spark. The feeling of this song was made for me. That goosebump moment when a lyric really echoes something that was unsaid, or a melody just feels like a memory that you didn't even know that you had. As humans, we really just want to feel seen. And music is one of those ways that we can. We want music to hold up a mirror. So even with algorithms doing the sorting, I think the emotional stakes remain so deeply human. Whether it's a handcrafted playlist from a friend or an eerily accurate made-for-you mix, what we're really chasing is connection to ourselves, to others, and to something bigger. So whether it's manual or machine-led, curation still has this power to say, I hear you, I see you. So in the end, playlists are just the latest chapter in a very old story, one where we use music to understand ourselves and each other. We may have more songs and smarter tech, but we're still doing what we've always done, telling our stories one track at a time. So I'll leave you with this. What was the most meaningful playlist that you've ever made or received? Was it for a road trip, a heartbreak, a new beginning? What did it say that words couldn't? Because maybe it's not about the format, whether it's a cassette, CD, or a streaming link, but just about the feeling. And I think we all relate to the fact that the feeling is still here. But that is all I have for you for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Sound Mind. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate or review on wherever you're listening and share it with someone who loves music and playlists just as much as you do. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And do come and say hi on Threads and Instagram at The Sound Mind Talks. And also don't forget to check out the monthly music membership that I mentioned earlier on. I would absolutely love to have you part of our new community. But until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on The Sound Mind.